and the Geek.
And welcome to Gleeman and the Geek, Royce's Here edition. I'm John Bonus from TwizDaily.com. With me, Aaron Gleeman of The Athletic.
Deja vu / Groundhog's Day, because last Friday, when last we spoke on this free episode, it was about 40 minutes later. I think it was 9 a.m. last Friday. It's 8:20 a.m. right now, this Friday. I don't know why I always tell people the time as if they're like, whoa, it was 8:20.
You're setting the scene.
Yeah, that's right. I'm really setting the
That's
scene.
right,
Yeah. John is in tuxedo for some reason.
Yeah. Right.
I'm fully
Pink tuxedo.
fully nude. So there's the scene. Pink tuxedo. Yeah. But last Friday, we were sitting at this very table, talking into these very microphones, and what was up in the air was Carlos Correa's the status of his foot. And I remember saying, well, it's weird to talk about it in any sort of certain terms. Right. Because, 6 hours from now, I'm going to go to the ballpark and hear what the actual diagnosis was or the status was. And at the time, I was like, whoa, man, I don't know. I think he's going to go on the injured list. Turns out we showed up at the ballpark last Friday.
He was in the lineup.
And he was in the lineup and has played, I guess he started 4 games since then, and then came in once as a ninth inning replacement. But last night against the Guardians, he left in the middle of the game after aggravating his plantar fasciitis. And afterward, we talked to him, and he said basically he was just warming up between innings, and Kirilloff threw him a ground ball like they do between most innings, just to the infielders. And he took like a, step in one direction, not even anything crazy, and just had like a shooting pain, which I know a lot of people, we heard from a lot of people after we talked about plantar fasciitis for so long on the last couple episodes, who kind of chimed in with their own thoughts. And it was funny because half the people were like, what's the big deal? I had this back in the day and it solved itself in a week. Right. And then half the people were like, it was the most debilitating injury I've ever had in my life. It felt like someone was stabbing me in the foot every time I took a step or something. Yeah, and so it can be, that's the problem with plantar fasciitis. Right. And that's what I think Correa has probably been experiencing, which is you take a couple days off, you show up on the third day, and it's like, well, my foot's a little sore, but I'm good to go. Then you play a few games, and by the way, he looked good defensively. He's still not really hitting, but he looked good defensively. And then just warming up between innings, take a wrong step, or not even a wrong step. I mean, just a step, and all of a sudden just shooting pain. You have to come out of the game, and now he's pretty much.
This is why those two words scare the hell out of Minnesota sports fans. Right? Yeah, it can be nothing. It can be incredible, right?
And I bet you that if you went city by city, fans in that, you go to whatever city and across the 3 or 4 sports that are there and go, hey, what are your memories of plantar fasciitis? They're all going to have a Michael Williams or a Wally Zerbiak or whoever, or a Carlos Correa now. And so I think the difficulty is, I mean, for us, it's really hard to kind of speculate or speak about what comes next when we're going to have a much, much better idea, 6 hours from now or whatever, or 7 hours from now. But it is certainly discouraging that after literally 1 week, he's essentially back in the identical spot, except it's almost worse because now there's no real proof of concept for just, I'll rest it and it'll get better.
Yeah, but there never is with plantar fasciitis.
Well,
that's part of the
sort of.
thing.
Although Baldelli, we mentioned this on the Patreon, Baldelli said, I had it for a whole season. Then a month into the offseason, I realized, hey, my foot doesn't hurt anymore. And all I did was just sit on my butt for a month. Right. So it is just something that one day could be fixed. Right. Or it's something that unfortunately could linger for months or years, as Michael Williams of the Timberwolves way back in the day could attest to. That Michael Williams forever scarred my childhood because I was in my teens, early teens maybe, and it would just be every year in training camp, he's feeling better, and then, nope, plantar fasciitis, same thing. So that's where Correa's at. I mean, he, in the moment, by the time people listen to this, there might be official status. So this is going to sound like a pointless discussion here, which is part of why I don't like the timing of this. Yeah. But he certainly seemed afterward, an hour or 20 minutes after the game, kind of saying, look, I don't know that it's any worse than it was a week ago, and maybe a day off, and I can do this all over again. Right. Except, is it is that really conducive to getting eventually to a good situation?
But it's not totally clear that a 10-day trip to the IL is either. Like, you just don't know.
I mean, it's going to be better than trying to play through it.
You would think
certainly.
so.
And particularly, it's not as if he's lighting it up right now.
Right.
I mean, he's back into a pretty deep slump here.
And they've got another shortstop on the roster now.
Yeah, Baldelli said after the game, when he was given some, semi-updates on the injured players, but they didn't really know because not only did Correa leave Thursday's series opener against the Guardians, which was one of the stranger games I've seen this season. The Cleveland puts together just a purely 2022 version of the Guardians inning where they score 6 runs or 5 runs on 6 singles and a walk.
Right.
Off
half of which are just ground balls that somehow find a hole through the infield.
Yeah,
right.
Just standard kind of ball in play. Oh no, we didn't get it, and then it just happens over and over again. But then, last year that happened plenty to the Twins versus the Guardians, and the Guardians did that to everybody. They Tito's bloop troop is what Zach Meisel, the athletics beat writer for the Guardians, calls them, and it's a great name. It's kind of like the Piranhas.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah.
They just blooped everyone to death. They ball and played everyone to death last year. And so I'm watching that happen to Pablo Lopez, and I'm thinking, it's just the same story. Yeah. But then, slightly different twist, Emilio Pagan comes in the game, who, as Zach Meisel also tweeted, was Cleveland's 2022 MVP, which I've made that joke before too. And throws 2 1/3 scoreless.
I know.
Looked great.
Yep.
Threw strikes, 8 innings that they needed desperately to have eaten.
Right.
And then the Twins came back after Correa left, Kepler left with a migraine, and Buxton left after getting hit in the ribs by a 96-mile-an-hour fastball. All 3 of those guys are sort of status unknown as of this morning. I'm going to assume Kepler is the least serious of those maladies because while a migraine is not something to brush aside, certainly, it's generally something that doesn't require weeks off.
Sure.
So I'm going to assume he stays off the IL, but the other 2 are very much in play, I would say. In play to not play, I would say, which Buxton... I mean, he took it right to the ribs, 96, and he stayed in, he ran the bases, but then he came out, and afterward he was like... Doe Young Park, former 2-time guest and 2-time Jeopardy. Do you think he mentions which 2-time appearance does he mention
Have
more?
we really only had him on twice?
I think so. Maybe 3 times.
Okay.
He said to Buxton post game, how does it feel to get hit in the ribs? And Buxton said, well, have you ever gotten hit in the ribs before? And Doe said, no, that's why I'm asking you. And Buxton said, well, I would advise you strongly to never get hit in the ribs. So it's like, thanks. I'll write that down. But afterward, he was going to go for X-rays and an MRI, which is never a great sign with Buxton or anybody else. So I don't know. It's tricky to we like to kind of use this show as a week in review and also a look ahead to what's coming.
Yeah.
Heading into the weekend always, but it's kind of difficult to get a real sense of where things stand when their 2 most prominent players, their 2 all-star players, are status unknown or certainly up in the air heading in.
Although they seem to be doing really well whenever those players aren't in the game, right? They also won Wednesday. Had a big offensive explosion with both those guys out, which was
you've cracked the case.
That's exactly it. We just got to
bench
lose
all the good players.
That dead weight of Correa and Buxton.
You need more Donovan Solano and more Willie Castro.
Exactly. That's right.
Sign those guys to long-term deals. The other story of yesterday's game and of a game in the Houston series is Royce Lewis,
right?
Who, as you mentioned, might end up playing some shortstop here.
Yeah, I did know. I mean, we did find it interesting that when Correa left yesterday, Farmer went in for Correa. They didn't switch things around or anything.
Right. Although he said afterward that the reason he didn't do that, the reason he didn't put Farmer in at third and put Lewis at short is because Lewis had already played half the game at third, and he had seen a couple of at-bats, and he just didn't want to mess with them.
I kind of figured the same thing.
And I just think the don't want to mess with them approach to Royce Lewis at this point when it comes to that or any other circumstance that is kind of a 50-50, like should I do this with Royce Lewis or not? I'm kind of on the side of don't mess with him. But, let's be honest, Kyle Farmer has played significantly more shortstop in the major leagues, or even if you include the minors the last couple years, than Royce Lewis, because Royce Lewis has been hurt. Kyle Farmer has like several hundred starts at shortstop for a major league team and is generally okay. So I wouldn't be surprised if they stick with Farmer. Like if Correa misses multiple games or goes on the IL, certainly.
Yep.
If they stick with Farmer at shortstop, although what happens then when Farmer sits, because he's not going to play 6 days a week, then does Lewis go to short? I think probably. But also I think they would like Lewis to just keep working at third and getting reps at third, because ultimately when everyone's healthy, as if that will ever happen at the same time, they do want Lewis to be at third.
Well, so there was at least one play yesterday in that 5-run inning where it looked like Lewis
forgot he was a third baseman.
Forgot he was a third baseman.
He pursued the ball in the hole to short, which
started pursuing it and then seemed to kind of watch Correa thinking he was going to throw it to first base, and like, oh no, the force plays at third. You got to be on the bag.
Well, it was tough because he went too far pursuing it, and then couldn't get back to the base, like you said, and then Correa threw it, and they didn't get the guy, so it just kind of. And I only think one more scored after that. That was
no. Well, I don't know. That might have
been
the
bulk of them had already scored by that point, but. Yeah, I mean, I don't have a great read on Lewis at third yet, other than something you mentioned, which I think proved true again yesterday, which is he's making plays generally, but they're very high effort plays.
Yes,
like he's charging in on everything and making whipping the ball over there. There are very few just and maybe
feels like he has to wind up to throw it all the way across the diamond. Which is
but I mean that also might just be he's not getting a whole lot of two choppers to third. Like there hasn't been a lot of truly routine just ground ball to third. It's been he's got to move, he's got to come in.
Yeah.
So he's made the plays other than that ball.
Right.
And there was one lined like one hopper that got past him during that inning too. It's tough to say if a longtime third baseman
almost made a hell of a play on a blooper yesterday that ended up also hurting them in left field, where I was watching him, run into a group of three guys, throw his body to try and catch this fly ball. And I was like, "Oh Jesus,
that's
Lewis."
The thing with Royce is the kind of less routine the play at third, or even at short for that matter. The less routine the play, and on a ball that's like a blooper fly ball or fly ball liner. He's going to be the best at those because that's just pure reaction and athleticism. It's not, fundamentals or reps or, muscle memory or that. That's just a ball gets blooped into short left. It's somebody's going to go chase after it, and the fastest guy with the best athleticism has got the best chance at it. And that's, partly why guys like me think eventually, not this season, center field is the way to go with him because he can just turn and run in that case. But we'll see about that.
After he gets up from that, he and Gallo and Correa, I think Gallo was playing left field at that time, are all just kind of standing around there, and I'm like, are they evaluating Lewis to make sure he's okay after this? But instead what it was is they were replacing a divot in the outfield.
A giant divot.
The umpire comes over there as well, and all four of them are sitting there trying to pat down.
It really did look like me off the tee on number one, just a chunk. Just took a chunk out of it.
Oh no! Is Lewis down like that? And they talked evaluating his knee.
Yeah,
they're evaluating the divot his knee made.
You've just ruined the green. It was a very interesting game. You kind of feel like did they win the battle but lose the war? But we'll find out.
We'll
I mean, it's feasible that none of the three go on the IL. We'll see.
Midway through that game, when they had given up that, like you said, the bloop troop.
Yeah, Tito's bloop troop.
I was like, this is just as frustrating as this season has been. This is just looks like one more brick in the wall of a frustrating season. In that, again, pretty good start by Lopez, but they get some goofy inning, and now we're going to kick off this, semi-important four-game test here in June with a stupid loss. As the offense doesn't really get anything done versus Bibby, which not a lot of people get stuff done versus Bibby. I thought this seems like a real disheartening loss to start this thing, and not to mention everybody getting hurt. And then by the end, I was like, no, the disheartening loss now is the other side. Their bullpen blowing that lead, and their closer. Was it Class A at the end?
He didn't even pitch.
Who was pitching in the ninth then?
I don't know, because the Twins had the lead, by the way.
Oh, they scored in the bottom of the ninth. Yeah, they tied. Right. Yeah,
so they were saving him for a save.
I see. I got this.
I think. I don't know. He had pitched the night before too, or the day before, because I watched him pitch the day before. But
it was turned up being a disheartening loss the other way.
Well, that's the thing. We were talking about this the other day as it relates to injuries, or as it relates to length of starts, which is we fall victim to this, and I think a lot of fans fall victim to this because, let's be honest, if your job is not to pay attention to baseball, you just watch the Twins, and maybe you tune into Sunday Night Baseball or one other game a week or whatever. It's hard to contextualize a lot of this stuff. So like nobody's been watching the Cleveland Guardians unless they've been playing the Twins. Right. I mean, for the most part, and it's like we're sitting here and we're going, well, that felt like a 2022 loss, and it would have been another brick in the wall of a frustrating season. And then you look and you go, well, also it put Cleveland 4.5 back of the Twins. They're now, 5 below 500 or something like that. They've had plenty of frustrating losses like this too. And for them, who have struggled so much to score runs with a punchless, contact-based lineup, which is the opposite of the Twins, but the same sort of end result, or they've scored even fewer runs. But there's surely a Guardians podcast this morning saying they finally score some runs and then they blow it anyway. What a frustrating season that is.
That's exactly right. I do think that's exactly right. I was like, this is a team that's coming in here hurting offensively, and we managed to score 6 runs.
They finally scored 5 runs. It takes them 15 hits in a row to score 5.
By the 7th inning, I'm like, this is exactly the way this is going to go. The Twins, Cleveland finally figures out their offense versus the Twins here just at the beginning of this 4-game series. And instead what happens is, they've apparently figured out their offense, but just still managed to lose the game.
So we're going to talk about Correa and Royce Lewis and the Kepler Wallner Larnach situation. But wait, first though, I have much more important and Polanco coming. We got a lot to talk about. Much more important. So I don't think it was on the free show, but over the last 2 Patreon episodes, which you should be subscribed to the Patreon. I feel they're getting really good. It's possibly because my brain is just mush at this point, but patreon.com/Gleeman. Anyway,
fun season.
On one of them, John, we recorded it after John and Chrissy had donated it to charity, the Twins Fund or whatever, for the right to play catch in the outfield at Target Field following whatever last.
Yeah, that was Sunday's game last week. No, Saturday's game last weekend. Yeah.
And so I took a little video. It was very cute, the two of them in their 500th year of marriage playing catch. And so then from that, I said to John, I don't know how we got to this discussion, but I jokingly said to John, if the Twins asked you seriously, will you play center field tonight? Would you do it? And John was like, absolutely. And I, of course, was like, oh, I would never do that. So from there, then we got asked some kind of mailbag question that got my mind churning again. And on the last episode, which was 2 days ago, Wednesday, which was a fun episode, we did almost like 2 hours of mailbag, and I ranted about Kepler, and we talked about the Bally Sports situation. So if you want to hear that, go subscribe.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit more about that.
A few more details about that. But anyway, it then became me saying to John, because I was so amused by how gung-ho he was to play center field and embarrass himself in a major league game.
I fully understood I was going to be embarrassing
But myself, I said, well, okay, let's then take it a step further. You're going to have to bat in that game. How many at-bats would it take against let's just say an average relief pitcher or an average starting pitcher who's trying? They view you as a real hitter, so they're trying. How many at-bats until you are able to just put a ball in play fair, not by bunting?
Right.
I don't know why I assumed you would be able to bunt, but let's take that out of the equation. And so in my head, I'm thinking, well, John will say you can't do that because any human who's not a baseball player would say they can't do that. And John goes, oh, I could do that. And I say,
put a ball in play.
Yeah, that's what you said. Right, yeah. This is the stupidity, the delusion that you put forth. I said, okay. And then I was like, well, let's gas this up a little bit. So I said, are we talking teens in terms of at-bats? Teens, hundreds, or thousands?
Right.
And you said teens. Yeah. So John believes he could put a ball in play against a major league pitcher who's trying their hardest in fewer than 100 at-bats.
Yes.
Which is incredible to me. And so we talked about this, and I said how absurd I think that is, and the majority of the people listening who commented agreed with me, which does not tend to happen. I will say if it's a 50-50 ball, people tend to go with John.
I feel very strongly about it. To me, just putting a ball in play doesn't seem like it's going to be that difficult.
Yeah. So. Keep going, because this is...
Keep going. Right.
So... At the ballpark yesterday, I brought this up to, I would say, 50 different people, including multiple former major leaguers.
Okay.
And multiple current members of the coaching staff.
Okay.
And every writer in the entire place. And not a single person thought you could do it given infinite at-bats. And
interesting.
I'm going to quote one of the former players who agreed to be quoted, who's Glenn Perkins, who said, wait a second, no effing chance
I could not
put a ball in play.
Never put a ball in play in 100 at bats.
And several of the players and coaches who I feel like would at least have some better sense than we would.
Sure, yes.
Suggested that not only couldn't you put a ball in play ever against a major league starter or a major league pitcher, that I could drop down to like AA or find a D2 college pitcher or even a really good high school pitcher, and you would eventually put a ball in play, but you would be shocked by how difficult and time-consuming it would be to actually get a ball in play.
Right.
So then the wheels in my brain started really moving, and I said, well, we're going to do this.
Yes, okay.
Maybe for charity.
Okay.
And I approached Glenn Perkins, and I said, Glenn, here's how I started it. He knew nothing of this. He hadn't listened to the show, obviously, because he has better things to do, I'm assuming. And I said, Glenn, what are you throwing these days? Like miles an hour. And he goes, nothing. Like what?
Right.
And I said, well, okay, could you throw 20 pitches at, 90%, and would it be 80 something miles an hour? And he said, maybe, but the next day you wouldn't want to see me. Like that would be it for me. And so I was going to pitch to him for some sort of charity.
Sure.
We get you out there. He gives you like 10 strikes, let's say.
Okay.
And if you put a ball in play. Now, this is a guy who had to...
10 strikes is different than 100 at bats.
Yes, but Glenn Perkins, who's 40-something years old and literally hasn't thrown a baseball because he has such shoulder problems that he had to retire, is slightly different than, Johan Duran or something like that. So but that's where he said, you can find anyone, any active pitcher or even recently retired pitcher, and they will be able to fulfill what you're looking for, which is to make Bonus realize he's insane. So that's where that's at. I'm working on it.
Good.
But the charity component is going to have to be the driving force.
Speaking of nuts.
Yeah, great segue. What if this was all just for that? We did this whole... Yeah.
Speaking of absolute nuts, we got a new sponsor, nuts.com. Both of us have received ordered some stuff from nuts.com. I got to tell you, the bourbon pecan, you didn't get the bourbon pecan, and that was a mistake.
You just wanted the bourbon, I think.
That was part of it.
Yeah, it's roasted. You can get like freshly roasted nuts, dried fruit, candy, sweets, salty stuff, pantry staples, all kinds of stuff.
You can get kind of healthy stuff, or you can get unhealthy stuff.
I got the unhealthy stuff.
I got the healthy stuff. I've still got some almonds I'm working my way through.
They have like snack packs, nuts packs, salty stuff,
organic choices, gluten-free options, other diet-friendly projects. If you want somebody that's trying to be careful what you get, but you get those little cravings at about 11 a.m.
It's a good idea.
Yeah, it's getting a handful of cashews,
and it's shipped well. The packaging is good. We ate like some of it, put a little away. You can kind of go back to the pantry when you need it.
We ate a lot of it away.
Well, we ate a lot of it too.
The pecans and the cashews were so good.
If you are in the snack game and you're looking for an upgrade and you're looking for some different choices and maybe to try some stuff that you wouldn't normally just pluck off the shelves at your standard grocery store, you can go to nuts.com. They're offering new customers a free gift with purchase and totally free shipping on orders of $29 or more. You just go to nuts.com/Gleeman. You can check out the delicious options. Nuts.com/Gleeman. You'll receive a free gift and free shipping when you spend $20 or more. That's nuts.com/Gleeman.
And then also, go to a baseball game.
Yeah, and watch the pitchers and think to yourself, I could hit this guy easy. As I had to point out
I didn't say I could hit him.
I had to point out to one member of the coaching staff who maybe wasn't familiar with John by name when I was saying, Bonus thinks he can do it. And the person said, tell me more about Bonus. And I said, and thank you for asking. This is a 56-year-old gentleman who has one eye and one knee.
Yeah, the eye thing, thinking about it after that conversation, I did go to myself, it would be nice if I still had both of my eyes working.
A lot of things would be nice, John. A lot of things would be nice. And the follow-up that I was asked was, well, how good was he in college? That's what he said to me, a coach.
Right.
He said, how good was he in college? And I said, I don't even know if he played high school. Like,
no, he did not. Absolutely did
right.
Not.
So that's the baseline we're starting from. So people began laughing at that point, and I thought, this is great. I wish I would have recorded all this because it would make for a good show. Anyway, game time. If you're looking for last minute or hard to find tickets, not only to sporting events, but like comedy shows, theater, anything really, that's their specialty is like, it's the night before or even the morning of, and you're like, ooh, I want to go to this, but it's going to be real hard to find tickets. Game Time, that's their specialty.
Yes.
That's what they're really honed in on.
Yeah, and you go out there. I think now is just a good, like there was 20,000 people at last night's game. It's easy to find tickets on Game Time. People ask me, I probably had 4 people within the last 2 weeks ask me about what's the best way to get tickets. And I just easily say, just go to Game Time. You're going to be able to find tickets for I found tickets for $4 or $5 to get into Target Field.
You download the Game Time app.
Right.
You create an account and then you use the promo code Gleeman and you'll get $20 off your first purchase.
Yeah.
Terms apply.
Off of a game.
You just create an account again and redeem the code Gleeman for $20 off. Download Game Time today for last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed.
I've been using this since 2019. You're going to like Game Time.
Okay. So let's run through some of this stuff here as we wait on the actual injury news. I mean, from the Astros series, it's of note that they finished the season series 4-2 against the defending champion Astros.
Yeah. And by the way, it's not like the Astros are struggling.
No, they've been
10 games over 500
lately.
or something like that.
I mean,
right? Yeah.
I bet in another 2 weeks they're going to be in first place, even though Texas got off to a great start.
Really good, yeah.
And they also finished the season series 4-3 against the Yankees. So if you'd have told me coming in, I mean, that is so different from past years when those two teams especially have just destroyed the Twins. I mean, it wouldn't surprise me if last year or the year before they were like 3-12 or something like that against those same two teams. I didn't really look. But so at least that is, I think, something
throw
that
the Dodgers in on that too. I mean, they
went
1-2
1-2
versus the Dodgers,
but
they really had,
easily could have won. I think something with the Twins especially that people try to kind of find each season is, regardless of the record, are there differences? Is there reason to believe this could play out differently than it does every season with the Twins?
Well, I would say in particular you pay a special attention to the good teams because you know those are the ones that you're going to be running into in the postseason.
Sure.
And at this point, winning the division doesn't mean that much for the Twins. I mean, even if the AL Central was any good, winning the division doesn't mean that much to Twins fans.
Yeah.
They've got to show that they can do something in the postseason, and having success against teams like Houston and the Yankees and to some extent the Dodgers.
Those are the two biggest boogeymen,
right? Yeah,
for the Twins
League,
probably,
sure,
and they will be for a while, and they have been for a while. So the fact that you went 8-5 with a winning record against both,
right?
I think is a good sign. Now we'll see. It's also just nice. We talked about this when we looked at the schedule at the beginning, like at the end of spring training. It's also just nice to be done with both of those teams.
Yes, exactly.
Because, I mean, there are years where you look at the schedule and you go, oh, no, they don't play the Yankees till August, and then they play them 7 times in 2 weeks. And it's like, well, that's going to be a road bump or a roadblock that you have to get past potentially in the season. The other thing, I love my note here. Perkins says, no effing chance. And writers all agree. That was another thing over dinner.
Yeah,
whole table
I
of
was
writers.
getting texts from both Dan Hayes and Doe during while I was at the game yesterday.
They were more like Dan and Doe and a couple other people, your employee Tom Schreier, who really went against you. They were almost more adamant than I was that it wasn't possible for you to do.
Okay.
And I would describe myself as very adamant if you would listen to the Patreon.
Yes. Yeah.
So anyway, we're gonna put something together.
Okay, I'm game.
I will give John credit. There isn't much you'll say to John that he won't do. And I don't mean like gross stuff or like dangerous stuff.
Right, yes.
I just mean he'll put himself out there.
Not jackass stuff. It's just,
jump into a pile of snakes or something. That's next on the show.
Throw myself down a flight of stairs.
Well, yeah, you were willing to do that, but only for certain starting pitchers.
We did land Correa.
But also this past week, Royce Lewis has come up and made a huge impact, like we mentioned. We'll talk a little bit more about him, too. But, he hits the 3-run homer against Houston. Then he hits the game-time single in that same game with 2 outs in the ninth to save their ass. And then yesterday hits the 2-run game-tying homer to again save the Twins' ass to dead center.
A blast to dead center that the center fielder started to go back on. Like, he didn't completely just watch it go.
Yeah.
But
that ball just kept going.
Yeah.
And we've seen a ton of balls die to dead center this year for the Twins and their opponents. It's been really tough, more so than usual even, for guys to hit out. And even last night, we saw a bunch of balls die in front of the bullpen in left center.
Yeah, and Polanco's down the left field line.
Yeah. Here was Baldelli's quote. He was talking about Royce afterward, and he said, he takes a good adult hack at the plate. And then he said, we've seen some balls go to center and not get out of the ballpark this year, but it couldn't hold him. He's got a little extra something behind it. And Baldelli obviously was full of praise for Lewis, basically saying, at this stage, given the time he's missed, to be able to jump in here, that's just pure talent taking over. That's just a baseball player shining through, and he said, I don't give a crap about where a guy was drafted, certainly at this point, but you're seeing why he was so highly touted, and you're seeing why people like us, and obviously the Twins, continued to kind of obsess about him throughout these last 2 or 3 years of missed time and rehabs and injuries, because similar to Kirilloff, I remember we had the same conversation about 3 weeks ago about Kirilloff. There's prospects, there's good prospects, and then there's potentially special prospects. Right. And with Kirilloff and Lewis, we still need to see more from Lewis physically and all that, but those are the guys that no matter what, stumbling blocks come up for them, or no matter how much time they miss, or if they struggle, or in these cases, they both had back-to-back significant surgeries on the same injury, basically, wrist for Kirilloff and knee for Lewis. You stick with them because they're not just going to become regulars; they have the potential to be stars. Yeah. And so to see Lewis just jump in,
it also gets to something I think we've talked about on this podcast a couple of weeks ago. The team that you have in Memorial Day is the traditional time for evaluating. Here's the team we have, right? But the team that you have in May is not necessarily the team that you're going to have in September. Yeah. And the biggest difference for the Twins is they do have these talents sitting at AAA or making their way up through the minors that they have a fair amount of faith in, and probably should have a fair amount of faith in. And we actually saw.
We've seen a huge immediate impact from Lewis, who is now locked in as either the starting third baseman or maybe shortstop, depending on Correa. Yep. Kirilloff has been their best hitter since he came off the IL. He's got a .450 on base percentage. Right. He's drawing walks. He's hitting doubles and singles. He hasn't really launched the ball that much. Right. But the quality of his at-bats has just been incredible, which is especially amazing given A, he's missed the bulk of 2 years with a wrist problem, and B, he was a great prospect in spite of not great plate discipline coming up through the minors. He has almost as many walks in 90-something plate appearances right now. I think he has 16 walks as he had combined the previous 2 years with the Twins. I think he had 19, and that was in 350 plate appearances or something like that. He looks like a completely different hitter.
In that way, I wonder if the wrist thing is... that's the silver lining to the wrist troubles that he's had the last couple of times. Is he's had to learn patience because it was painful to swing.
Yeah, I think with Lewis too is he's I think swung at. I don't know that Lewis has drawn a walk this year or last year. Right. Maybe he had one last year with the Twins, but I think similarly, Lewis got a chance to really work on his body beyond the knee. Right. And get a lot stronger. And I think when Baldelli says...
just older.
Well, that's
true, too. Growing into muscles.
But I think, the adult hack. I like.
That's right, yeah.
Baldelli said afterward, we were walking out in the hallway, and I said, that was a good quote about the adult hack. And he goes, I almost called it a big boy swing, but I thought that might be insulting to him. So he made a change on the fly.
But it's not just Kirilloff and Lewis are both good examples of guys that have come and made an impact. We've seen flashes as well from from Wallner.
Wallner went 6 for 6.
We haven't talked about him being sent down yet. And Julian, he had 2 big games since we last talked. Both Friday and Saturday were big games for him, right? And he got sent down, so we've seen flashes there as well. Even to some extent, Larnach, who also is in the news this week. We got a lot to talk about.
Yeah. Okay. So let's just go piece by piece here. I don't know. I feel like there's obviously every week there's a lot to talk about with Correa, but I almost feel like this will be something we talk about maybe on Monday's Patreon show. Maybe. Again, similar to last week, once we have a sense of is he back in the lineup? Is he on the injured list? It seems kind of pointless to speculate about it on a Friday morning when Friday night we're going to find out. But it's hard to imagine a worse start to a 6-year contract just from a performance standpoint, from an injury standpoint. It's rough.
Well, the worst start would be if something was wrong with the ankle.
Yeah, I guess, but plantar fasciitis is not good. It's I don't know. It's pretty bad. And by the way, it's not as if the ankle has now been cleared for eternity.
Sure,
it's still looming potentially. Royce Lewis, I don't know. We could talk about him forever too. I think he's gonna have stretches, particularly if he stays this aggressive at the plate, right, where they start to feed him breaking balls and they start to kind of get to the edges of the zone more, because I do think the homer he hit was basically middle, but it was 96. But they're still challenging him because they look at him as, well, what's he proven? And he's missed 2 years. Like, I'll throw him a 96 relatively down the middle. And the more he punishes that, which he certainly has the ability to do, which, by the way, when they drafted him, and even early in the minors with him, when he was having great seasons in the minors and make himself a top 25, top 50 global prospect, it was not based on power. Right. It was based on speed and bat to ball skills and kind of being a slashing, all field singles and doubles type of guy. We saw the power a little last year. I mean, he was hitting tanks at St. Paul, and then they called him up, and he hit the grand slam against Cleveland at Target Field, got the standing O and all that, or the curtain call. I mean, he's hitting these, and these are not wall scrapers. Like, I mean, the one to the opposite field against Houston was not a bomb, but there are just very few guys who can hit a ball like that and get it over a fence to the opposite field like that. And then the one he hit last night is, there are certain – I read something, I forget, maybe it was on Fangraphs or MLB with the StatCast stuff, but if you take a guy's like 90th percentile exit velocity, it really separates kind of wheat from chaff, because it's a level that only certain guys can get to. It doesn't guarantee that you're going to be a great hitter just because you hit the ball harder than everyone else, but there are
don't look at their absolute max velocity.
Right.
Take a look at where they are at the 95th percentile.
And so I look at Lewis, the ball he hit to dead center, and I just think to myself, there are only a few guys on any major league team who can even do that once, let alone like do it in their one of their first 20 games.
If I had 100 at bats,
cumulatively, you would not. I did say in the middle of last night's game, I would love to see the total distance traveled by balls hit by the Twins and balls hit by Cleveland at the point at which Cleveland was winning. Like, it had to be 3-1 in the Twins' favor.
Let me ask you the question about Royce Lewis I was asked yesterday, and I'll see if you come up with a similar answer.
Okay.
The question was this: other than like a rehab assignment or whatever, right? What is the percentage chance that Royce Lewis never is demoted again?
I mean, they would like it to be 0.
Well, I know.
That's certainly what the Twins
everybody would like it to be 0.
Well, I just need to clarify, like, that is the plan.
Right.
Or the hope.
Yes.
He's not viewed as, like, filling in for Miranda. I mean, this is his to get.
This is it, yes.
I mean, with any young player, I mean,
this is what I'm doing.
Miranda's a prime example, which is if you would have asked me this in late July of last year about Miranda, I might have said, well, why would he go back to the minors?
Right.
Things can change. But yeah, I don't know.
What percentage chance that he ends up back in the minors at some point?
I mean, maybe 5-10%, something like that.
I went a little higher than that.
But I would say that about
20%.
But I would say that about almost any guy with 15 games in the majors,
with options.
True.
Well, no, that's what kind of the thing. It's
there's always a possibility that again the league starts testing him differently and starts not throwing in the zone, and he starts chasing a little bit, and he goes through a slump, and let's say Correa's healthy and Miranda starts hitting again, and something, and they'll go. Yes. All right, Royce needs a reset at AAA or whatever. But yeah, I mean, I think it's certainly unlikely at this point. He just looks, Baldelli, it sounds stupid, but it's one of the best compliments that people in baseball will give, which Baldelli said last night, like, this is just a baseball player. Like, there is a sense about him, and that's why he went 1-1 in the draft out of high school. These are the same things people said about him back then, which is you just look at him and you watch him play and you just go, this guy's just good. It's similar. You show up to some high school game, you go watch your cousin or something go and play in a high school game. You watch 3 innings and you just go, oh, yeah, the shortstop's like way better than everyone else. And that's just the vibe I think he gives off.
I mean, that's true. But that's also was the true of, like, say, Miranda in spring training.
Sure.
Like, this guy's just a hitter. He's just a hitter. And,
I agree.
Right? Yeah.
Prospects are they're silly, really, is what they are. So 2 veterans returned, Kepler and Polanco. Kepler returned Monday. Polanco returned last night. From the IL, both with hamstring injuries. Both missed roughly 2 weeks with a hamstring injury. And that meant 2 corresponding moves had to be made. And in both cases, the Twins made the straightforward, obvious move of sending down the player who had been called up to replace them when they got hurt. Right. So in Kepler's case, Kepler went on the IL. Actually, Kepler went on the IL. Larnach replaced him, and then Larnach got pneumonia and then was replaced by Wallner. So really, Wallner replaced Kepler, but with Larnach as the middleman. So Kepler's back. Larnach is still on the IL, although is beginning a rehab assignment tonight with the Saints in Buffalo. Okay. And it sounds like he might play the weekend at AAA. Then everyone has Monday off, including the Twins. and then he could be back Tuesday. Although, what does back mean?
I think he's back at
Right.
St. Paul.
So similar to Wallner. So Kepler comes back. Wallner goes back down, even though he was riding an 8 plate appearance
on base
streak.
Right.
And then in his first 3 games at St. Paul, he homered in all 3.
Did you see the exit velocities he had?
Yeah,
in all of those
he's
at-bats?
just smoking the ball.
Crazy.
And Kepler went 2 for 17, lowered his batting average to 198, and then exited the game with a migraine headache. Which that is something he's had in the past. I don't want to downplay migraines because it is serious, or can be serious. And then Polanco, similarly, Polanco comes back. They send down Julian, who had been called up in the first place to sub for Polanco. That was very straightforward too. And I think maybe more would have been made of that, like, oh, isn't there a place for Julian, if he weren't overshadowed so much by Wallner.
Right.
Because Julian had I think a 101 OPS plus in 72 plate appearances this year, which for a rookie is good. Hit 4 homers in 72 plate appearances, 7 walks. The 3 things I will say about him are, 1, the defense was every bit as rough as expected, which has always been the case. We've talked endlessly about his defense in spring training at second base. 2, I think he has great plate discipline. But I think at times he was almost like passive in a few at-bats where he would just take 3 strikes and go sit back down. That can't happen. But that's something that is easy enough to fix. The thing that really stood out to me was, the power he showed when he got into one. That's legit.
That's right.
To all fields.
Especially opposite field power.
But
that was the most impressive
he
to me.
He cranked one in, Fenway or something, to right center too. And then the stat that I really, matched the scouting reports on him was the average hitter, league-wide, swings at about 30% of pitches outside the strike zone. In other words, you throw 100 pitches that aren't strikes, you're going to get swings on like 28 or 29 or 30 of them, 30%, let's call it. He swung at 17% of non-strikes, which is precisely what everyone said about him, which is he just will not swing at bad pitches. He just won't. He has an incredible eye at the plate. That's how he posts 450 on base percentages in the minors. That's how he walks 100 times in the minors. But the flip side to that is we also saw him refuse to swing at some strikes.
Right.
I think he swung at like 60% of balls in the zone, which the usual rate is 70% or something like that.
Just so we're clear, you don't always want to swing at a strike. Right, yeah. Right.
I would prefer a young hitter have his extreme approach than the opposite approach, which is to swing at everything. But, there are some areas to work on. I think defensively, either A, he has to get much better at second base, or B, he has to not play second base. But they've been oddly, in my opinion, hesitant to give him any kind of game reps at first base, left field, DH, that sort of thing. I do think ultimately that's going to be how his bat gets in the lineup, but for now they still view him as a second baseman. And I don't want to act like he's the worst second baseman I've ever seen.
Sure.
But there were just a handful of plays where you just go, no, that's not right. It didn't look right. The other thing is, you got to maintain that discipline at the plate, but also avoid being passive in key spots and avoid being, someone that they feel they can just pump strikes to early in the count. And I'm pretty confident he'll be able to fix that because that's something he's been very aware of and even talked to us about during spring training.
That's what struck me after watching him at this level, because we got to watch him at spring training and such too. But watching him at this level in these, a little more pressure situations, I kept flashing back to like the first time we talked to him, where it was, the question was sort of, when did things really click for you at Double-A? What made things click? And his answer was, I started getting aggressive on the first and second pitch.
Early in counts.
I want to be aggressive. I want to go up there with I'm going to hit this ball mindset early in the counts. That was a little strange to hear from somebody who's known for his patience, right? Who's known for knowing the strike zone and so on. And you that's the sort of thing you'd see a Carlos Gomez would seem to be. That would be his philosophy. I'm going to go up there and I'm going to hit, But for him, that's an adjustment. And his adjustment, frankly, it sounds like he still needs to kind of keep thinking. Like he's still got to be thinking, I'm going to swing at these first couple pitches.
Here's the truth, and we see this with, I always use David Eckstein as an example. When David Eckstein, the Cardinals and Angels shortstop from the early 2000s, I don't know why he's always my example, but it's a very prominent example of what I'm going to talk about, which is
Midwest boy.
When he was, I think he might be from California.
I thought it was North Dakota.
Oh, maybe you're right. I don't know.
I can't remember.
he looks like he could be in your family. Just looks wise.
Well, I just assume there's so many of those like middle infield guys like that from that era that I remember their name. That I could absolutely have him mixed up with a different one.
I mean, you're probably right. I have no idea where he's from. But in the minors, he had such a good eye at the plate and such an ability to make contact that I remember he was a Red Sox prospect, like a not heralded prospect, second base prospect, I think. And he drew like 100 walks in multiple seasons in the minors. But then he got to the majors, and he was still a really good player all around. But his walk rate like just plummeted to the point that he had a horrible walk rate, and he instead turned himself into sort of a early swing off and contact hitter, and he made himself into a good hitter. But the reason he had to make that adjustment is when you don't have power and you're 5'5" like Eckstein was, you're never going to get walked because they're just going to throw you strikes. And that's not to say Julian has significantly more power than David Eckstein, but what he's going to learn, and probably has learned in these 72 plate appearances, is he's not going to draw 100 walks a season against Major League pitching. I mean, he'd be lucky to draw 75 in a season, even if things go well for him. And those 25 walks or maybe 50 walks that you kind of just lose because the pitchers are just better, and also they're not scared of you the way that AA and AAA hitters, because you're no longer the biggest threat that they're going to see in a given week. They're just going to pump you strikes, which we've seen to some extent. And that doesn't mean his eye is any less valuable. Right. It just means what happens to those 25 or 50 plate appearances when AA and AAA guys are walking you. Where do those get distributed now when you're getting thrown strikes in those plate appearances? And they need to get
quality strikes.
Right.
Strikes,
that's the other thing.
Strikes you don't want to swing at mostly.
I mean, it sounds obvious, but that is one of the biggest differences, I would say more so than just raw stuff, between AAA and the majors. There are plenty of guys, especially relief pitchers, who throw 96 with a good breaking ball at AAA. I mean, we see them shuttled up and down all the time. It's a very thin line. I mean, half the guys at AAA play in the majors in a given sezen. Right. But the biggest difference is
they throw them in a square.
Right. The guys can paint corners in the majors, and even the guys who lack great stuff can kind of overpower you with their strike throwing. We've seen it from a guy like Louis Varland, which has become like his biggest strength is the raw stuff he could just sort of overwhelm people with a little bit in the minors. But major league hitters see 96 all the time. Right. But his ability to just pound the strike zone, and I think that's what Julian is going to have to adjust to, which I think is, whenever he gets back to the majors, and I'm assuming we'll see him at some point again this season and in the future for sure, he's going to have to adjust to how do I swing at only good pitches, but also be aware that I'm going to see more good pitches. Right. So taking that approach, but in general, I mean, you would take that first 20 games or whatever he played from any prospect. Right. I mean, he held his own. He had his head above water offensively. He showed some power. He drew some walks. It looked good. And yet it pales in comparison to Wallner, who was just on fire for the last 2 or 3 games that he played. Although the funny thing is, before those last 2 or 3 games, he was hitting like 0.78. Right. There was no one campaigning for him to stay in the majors at that point. Right. Yeah. Before we talk about the Kepler-Wallner situation, let's talk about Stamps.com. I always use the example of I became a Stamps.com user like 4 or 5 years ago when I had the bright idea of coming out with a book and saying to people, hey, if you send me $20, I will autograph the book and send it to you. Right. And I thought, maybe 50 people will take me up on that. Instead, it was like 1,000 people. And I realized...
But even if it was only 50, you would have used... True. You'd like to use Stamps.com.
But I basically turned my living room into... Actually, dining room.
Into a light industrial factory.
It's all one room, let's be honest. Into a shipping factory. Yeah, right. And without being able to use Stamps.com, I would have been driven mad. Yeah. And the Stamps.com...
to were already, even if...
It really saved me because, A, you can print your own labels for everything, which saves you trips after trips after trips to the post office, which is somewhere you don't want to spend a whole lot of time. And the beauty of stamps is when you print the labels, it gives each one a number, and then you can track the shipment. So you can say, if someone says, hey, where's my book? You can say, oh, actually, it was delivered yesterday, so we got to figure out what happened here, or it's scheduled to come tomorrow. And, regardless of what you're shipping, you can just sort of have it on hand, and all you need is a printer, basically. Right. And you can, label and ship and print and do the postage for and weigh. And you can just drop it in any mailbox or give it to your postal carrier instead of having to wait in line. It's just a great invention,
right. Yes.
And something that I think people don't even maybe realize is available to them as they wait in line for the third hour at the post office.
So you can also avoid the hassle and get started with Stamps.com today. Sign up with the promo code GEEK. So this is GEEK is the promo code, not Gleeman. Sign up with the promo code GEEK for a special offer that includes a 4-week trial plus free postage and a free digital scale. No long-term commitments or contracts. Just go to Stamps.com, click the microphone at the top of the page, and enter the code GEEK. And also, listen, I've been using, we always talk about native deodorant, but I've been using native sunscreen because you get those seats down the third base line at Target Field during a day game. That sun last weekend was brutal. You have the same concerns about sunscreen that you have with deodorant, which is, what am I putting all over myself on a regular basis?
Over myself.
Right. Except you're not just putting it underneath your armpits, you're putting it on your face, you're putting it on your arms, your legs.
Native uses natural ingredients and stuff that you see the ingredients listed and you go, well, I at least know what that is. It's not some chemical that I've never heard of, some compound or whatever. Right. They also have deodorant, but like John said, the sunscreen. 3 delicious
subtle sites. I was using coconut and pineapple. They also have rosé or sweet peach and nectar for your face or body. So I know you like to smell nice when you.
And they have unscented if you just like your natural smell, but you'd like some sunscreen protection.
Right. Yes,
give your skin the protection it deserves with Native's mineral sunscreens. Go to Native DEO, DEO like deodorant, nativedeo.com/Gleeman. Use the promo code Gleeman at checkout. You'll get 20% off your first order. That's nativedeo.com/Gleeman. Use the promo code Gleeman at checkout. nativedeo.com/Gleeman. Okay. I don't know. Kepler and Wallner. I ranted for about a half hour on the Patreon. So I'll give you the Cliffs Notes version of that. Like we said, Wallner was always going to be the move to be sent down, the corresponding move. If Larnach would have not gone on the IL with pneumonia, he would have been the corresponding move to be sent down. But that doesn't make it any less, awkward or the optics any less weird of this guy's just on absolute fire and we sent him down and then he just kept destroying the ball at AAA. And meanwhile, Max Kepler is being Max Kepler, which is he's long funk. And the other thing, Kepler didn't even go on a rehab assignment. Like they could have bought themselves an extra 3 days and basically given Wallner a chance to cool off. Right. Or at least, end his on-base streak at some point and then said, okay, now we're going to send you down. Instead, Kepler comes back without going on a rehab assignment, which happens to him quite a bit, and then goes 2 for 17.
I can't ever remember him being on a rehab assignment.
Yeah, he's one of the guys who skips them. Yeah. And so I get why people are kind of up in arms with that, but, I don't know. We said this on the Patreon, like, if you've been listening to the show for any length of time, I think my thoughts on the Kepler situation, and I think John, for the most part, agrees with me, maybe a little less extreme. But it's not like no one should be surprised that Wallner got sent down when Kepler was activated, because that decision of sticking with Kepler here on June 1st or whatever was essentially made in December or January when they decided not to trade him.
They're not going to make a wholesale change like that once he is starting the season with the team. They're not going to, in the middle of May, lose a veteran, lose the additional depth that comes from that, especially when you've got injury problems with Kirilloff and Larnach and not Wallner so much, but other questions about Wallner, whether or not he can hit for average, etc. You've got questions about all of the replacements for him, right? So they're not, and unfortunately, if he's going to be on the roster, he's got to play. He's got to start. He can't be a bench bat on this roster.
Right.
They don't have that flexibility with 13 people right now. They've got too many other things that they're doing.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same reason that they don't just keep Wallner in addition to Kepler, because it's just such a limited role for that. It's pinch hitter or whatever. But Now, that doesn't take the Twins off the hook.
No.
I'm not suggesting in any way that they're doing, like, quote unquote, the right thing by sticking with Kepler at the expense of Wallner or Larnach or whatever. All I'm saying is,
I also don't think you're advocating that they go and cut Kepler or trade Kepler right now and bring these guys up right now.
Well, what I'm saying is it's a tricky thing because my point is they should have never gotten to this stage with Kepler.
Right. I think
they should have traded him in December or January or February. Right. And they claim they could have, and they could have.
Yes.
But what they claimed at the time, to me at least, was, not only can we dump his $8.5 million salary whenever we want, which I certainly believe was the case. I asked around to other teams about that, and that's true. But what the Twins claimed was it doesn't have to be just a salary dump during the offseason. We feel we can get actual value for him. And I thought, well, okay, I guess I'm not shocked by that, but it's a little surprising. Right. But then as the next couple of months played out and spring training started and Kepler was, there he is again, he's the right fielder again, and he's on the opening day roster and he's pushing aside younger players on all that, and he's batting leadoff early in the season and all that. I thought to myself, well, one of two things happened here. Because I do think the Twins were telling the truth, at least from their point of view, about Kepler. I asked around with other teams, and they kind of, corroborated what was going on. But one of two things happened, and neither of them are great for the Twins. Either they just vastly overrated Max Kepler's trade value, which I'm going to say is the Occam's razor outcome here, given that they've stuck with Kepler for 3 years running when it seems like he's a trade candidate and it seems like he's ready to get phased out, and they just haven't done that. And they were just asking for too much, and no team was willing to take on his $8.5 million salary for a declining player and give them, a good reliever or a couple of decent prospects or whatever their asking price was. I heard various versions of what they were actually asking. Or, and I'm guessing this is what the Twins would say, the other 29 teams collectively underrated Max Kepler, which I guess that's plausible, but ultimately that's meaningless because there's only 30 teams. So if you place a value on a player and 100% of the other teams that could trade for him disagree with that value, you've overrated him. Do you know what I mean? There is no theoretical other 10 teams. There's 30 teams. You can't go, well, if there was some other team, they might trade for him because they would see his value. Well, the other 29 did not match your value. And I get the kind of baseline logic of that, which is $8.5 million is not an exorbitant salary for a starting right fielder.
Right.
And he also, for next year, has a $10 million option or a $1 million buyout, which they, I would say stubbornly, but they continued to view that as an asset as opposed to something to get out from under, that $1 million. Right. And if you buy into all that, and they're clearly bigger fans of Max Kepler than I am, and if you buy into that, and it's like, well, yeah, why would we dump him just to dump him?
Right.
But my point at the time was, A, he's a declining asset, and I've given up. There's no reason, in my opinion, to view him as having upside. I think the canard of, the shift limitations are going to fix him. All research on that I read that I would trust suggested it was going to equal like a half dozen singles a year. I mean, and we've kind of seen that. He has a lower batting average on balls in play this year than ever before, and he literally has the lowest career batting average on balls in play of any hitter since 1990, and it's like 195 this year. We've seen exactly what we thought would play out, which is, they can't do the extremist shifts against him. Right. But they can still shift him, and he still just chops balls to second base and hits pop-ups and hits weak fly balls, and those are always going to be out. So the fact that he makes contact isn't that valuable. And so my thought at the time in December, January, whatever it was, is he still a useful player? Sure. He's a really good defensive corner outfielder. He's got some speed. He's an slightly below average hitter, but that's not the end of the world when packaged with the defense. He's a low end starting, player. Is that great value for $8.5 million? No, it's not terrible value. Right. But my thought, similar to Pagan, was, and it's the same argument, really. It was their argument was, well, we still think Pagan is a useful reliever, and what's $3.5 million? Right. Well, we still think Kepler's a useful starting right fielder, and what's $8.5 million? Well, yeah.
Well, that's why he was potentially a tradable asset, right? People are going out there and signing left-handed hitting out corner outfielders, and they're having to give them multi-year deals or something like that. And
I mean, even they gave Joey Gallo $11 million for 1 year. So, but my point then, and certainly now, was looking at this roster. you could have traded Kepler, gotten some value in return, less than they wanted, obviously, turned the position over to Larnach, or as it turned out, Larnach was needed to fill in for Kirilloff, so it would have been Wallner on the opening day roster. Yeah. I would have had no problem with that. He was their minor league player of the year, and he crushed AA and AAA last year. I get that they maybe thought he needed a little bit more time at AAA, but whatever. For 10% of the cost, $700-something thousand, and use that remaining $8 million to, I don't know, sign a relief pitcher or anything, really. And so now, 2 months in, every kind of skepticism or head-scratching element of their decision not to trade Kepler has played out, in the, I don't want to say the worst way, but in the ways that people like me feared, which is he's, again, not been productive. He's hit 198. Yeah. He's been sidelined.
84 OPS plus.
Right. I mean, he's just not – he's, 80 points off of an average right fielder. Right. Defense is fine, but, I mean, come on, at some point. He's already been sidelined twice with minor injuries, which is now happened 6 times in the last 3 years, which is – you can't even say, well, he's at least dependable because he's out all the time, and his performance fluctuates pretty wildly in there. And Wallner is a 25-year-old reigning minor league player of the year who put up like a 980 OPS in the high minors last year and has been even better at AAA this year. And in the couple of brief stints he's now gotten in September and again recently with the Twins, totaling, 25 games or whatever it's been, he's more than held his own, including being on fire the last 2 or 3 games before they sent him down. And so,
I mean, for that matter, you've also got Larnach sitting down at St. Paul as well. Listen, I understood last year going into spring training, still having Kepler on the right. Listen, in December when we all thought he was going to get traded, right? When they signed Gallo, and we were all like, listen, this is absolutely the end for Kepler. There's a 98% chance he's traded, right? Going fast forward that 3 months, they haven't traded him yet, and we get to the beginning of spring training.
Although they traded Arise to remove a left-handed bat instead.
So basically. Now they need, maybe they need another left-handed bat, and we're also taking a look. We're like, there are questions about all the other guys, right? But you don't need all of them to hit. You just need one of them, or one or two of them, for the answer to be yes, to make it valuable. There were even questions about Gallo. Let's be honest. Coming
but that's the thing. Right. There were questions about Kepler.
Well, that's true.
So that's where that falls apart for me. I'm not saying what you're saying, but their logic.
So you've got 5 guys, and there's questions about all of them. And you're like, we need to. Wouldn't you just be just as good with 4 of those guys?
Right. It would be different if you didn't have multiple top prospects or former top prospects, left-handed hitting corner outfielders with some upside in Larnach and Wallner waiting in the wings. Then I could say, well, yeah, if your alternative is Mark Contreras or Kyle Garlick, then hang on to Kepler. But even if, and this is what ended up happening, Larnach was needed to fill in for Kirilloff, which then you go, it's a good thing they have depth.
Right.
But they had already signed Gallo, and what would have been the end result? Yeah. Would Wallner have been the opening day right fielder? And by the way, I felt the whole time they really, and I still think this, all offseason we laid out all kinds of right-handed hitting outfielders, Andrew McCutchen, Trey Mancini, Adam Duvall, those type of guys. If they would have traded Kepler, handed the primary right field duties to Wallner for 10% of the cost, and then used the $8 million to go sign some decent right-handed hitting outfielder, then you have exactly as much outfield depth, but it's an actual better fit from a functionality, day-to-day utility standpoint. And instead, they just sort of stockpiled all these nearly identical left-handed hitting corner outfielders. Gallo, Kepler, Larnach, Wallner, and all that happened was 2 of them, who are the youngest and cheapest, and I would argue have the most long-term viability for the Twins, potentially, were just kind of cast aside to the point that now Wallner's just at AAA, the AAA pitcher's got to be saying, like, what's this guy got to do to get out of the International League? Why do we have to keep pitching to this guy?
The question being that, I don't mind relitigating the decision they made this offseason because, and pointing out how it has turned out. The question to me sort of right now is, so what now, though? Like, that to me is the more interesting question.
Sure.
And it's probably the question they themselves are wrestling with. And I think June, you start getting to the point where.
Agreed. That's why I have an article this morning, basically saying what you're saying, which is
because I think we are probably more willing to say you trade Kepler away. I mean, if Aaron Hicks can find a job someplace, Max Kepler can find a job someplace, right? You get rid of Kepler, but that does now you have less depth, right? I don't know if you need that additional depth or not, right?
Right. I mean, in now the 3 days, they're going to have Larnach and Wallner available.
Agreed. Yep.
And look, maybe Kirilloff
there's your depth.
hurts his wrist again, or maybe Gallo gets hurt again. But, I mean, yeah, that's the case with any team. Right. You don't have 9 guys quality at every position.
The question sort of becomes that it's like the clock isn't really ticking until Memorial Day on Kepler, right? He's going to get those first 2 months to try and figure out what's going on.
Right. I mean, I think you're
now
right.
The clock starts ticking between now and the trade deadline.
I agree. Basically. Because, like we said, no one should be shocked that Kepler is welcomed back from the injured list. That decision, I mean, they were never going to cut him. Once he makes the opening day roster or gets to spring training, I guess, makes it through the offseason on the team, which to me was a head scratcher to begin with. But once that happens, well, I mean, they're going to stick with him for 2 or 3 months. But to your point, now we're at the stage of the season where depth is not as important for a couple reasons. One, you only have 100 games to play instead of 162.
Correct.
2, someone like Wallner is just banging on the door to the majors
showing
now.
What they can do, right? Yep.
And then 3, you're a month away from being able to make trades. And so if you do need outfield depth, if it all goes haywire, injury-wise after you trade Kepler, just go out and trade for somebody too. So,
I mean, even Trevor Larnach, as much as he has struggled in the majors, being sent down, right, to AAA, still better than Max Kepler right now.
Yeah, Larnach's career OPS plus is 94, which means it's 6% worse than the league average, which is scaled to 100.
Right.
During that same 3-year period, 2021, 2022, and 2023, Max Kepler's OPS plus is 94.
Yeah. Right.
So Larnach's first taste of the majors, which has been very underwhelming and has gotten demoted several times, has been identical to Kepler. Now, Kepler's a vastly superior defensive player, but Kepler's also 30 and is clearly on the decline and is making literally like 12 times as much money. And so that's where I'm kind of at with it, which is, did I expect them to cut Kepler by now? No. I think they should have parted ways in the offseason. But once they don't do that, then he is going to get a decent run here to get at least to June with the job. But now the depth should no longer be a priority, particularly because what is he offering as depth if he's not playing well? And you have Wallner waiting in the wings. And here's the other thing. We're not talking about some 22-year-old kid here. Matt Wallner's 25. He's got 100 and something games in the high minors, including 90 games at AAA where he's just crushed. And he's got
we've said the same
25 games in the majors.
And we said the same thing, made the same argument about Larnach as well, which is these guys have got to sink or swim here pretty soon.
You have to find out what you have. And clearly, I mean, I say this, I knock on wood, Max Kepler is not part of the Twins' plans beyond this season. Now, I've said that before and been wrong, but I mean, it seems obvious. And so if he's not part of your plans beyond this season, or at least let's put it this way, should not be part of your plans beyond this season, then the only question is, are you convinced that he is clearly superior for the rest of this season than Larnach and or Wallner?
Right.
I think that's a really difficult argument to make at this point, particularly after seeing Wallner. And we've seen Larnach, who I would not describe as playing well, and he's basically matched him from production. So, I mean, you're telling me that Wallner, even if the strikeouts flare up and, we start to see some flaws, which we will if he's playing, you're telling me he can't post a 690 OPS with acceptable defense? And so that's where I'm at the point with Kepler, is now we've gotten to the point where they're compounding a mistake. They're making it worse. You made the mistake of not parting ways with him during the offseason. Then you stuck with him, which is understandable given that first action, and he struggled. He's hitting 198. So you've cost yourself for 2 months.
Right.
He's part of why the lineup has struggled. And now you're in June. You got one guy in Larnach who deserves to play to just find out what he is, and another guy in Wallner who is just his bat is just screaming for an opportunity at age 25. And the longer you go with Kepler, all you're doing is saying, well, we kind of made a mistake keeping him, but we guys got to keep going down this path. And I just don't think it's a good path. So whether that means he needs to be DFA'd or traded or salary dumped or whatever, I don't understand the present upside of sticking with him over those 2 other guys. And I certainly don't understand the future gains that are from that. And so it's a frustrating thing to kind of see it all And again, this didn't take some genius to say that they should have traded Max Kepler.
Right.
A lot of people were on board. When John and I agree on something, it's not taking genius brain power.
Everybody took a look at we've got way too many left-handed hitting corner.
And to see it play out almost precisely as everyone kind of feared or was hesitant about, it seems like doubly frustrating, especially when the lineup, you mentioned this on the Patreon. If this were 2019 and you had 5 or 6 guys slugging 500 and the lineup was putting up 6-7 runs a night, then go ahead and back Kepler 8th and just live with the defense and hope he turns it around. But you cannot live with bad offense from right field when you're also getting bad offense from center field and catcher, and for that matter, 2-3 other spots in the lineup on a given day. So that's where I'm at with Kepler. There's another rant for you.
Let's hit our last sponsor. And that sponsor is Sunday. You're not too late to go out to getsunday.com/Gleeman.
Yeah, I told a fellow writer who was complaining about the state of his lawn last night.
But you're close. You're close to too late. There's last spot of the year with us, which means even in Minnesota, summer does get here. You need to fertilize your lawn. You are probably got through Memorial Day weekend, and you're like, geez, I never did get to the lawn quick. This is the quickest, easiest way to do it.
Here's what it does. It captures, you tell them where you live.
You put your address down.
They can tell you, the dimensions of your lawn, so how much of this you'll need.
Right.
They can also tell you the type of soil and kind of the environmental factors so that they can then make you up kind of a cocktail specific to your lawn.
Yes.
And then they send it to you, and then all you do is hook it to the nozzle of your hose, and then just spray it, and then boom, better lawn.
Yes.
Super easy, customized for you.
It's just such a great product.
And for a limited time, Sunday is offering Gleeman and the Geek listeners 50% off your first box. So
half price.
You can get started today for as little as $55 when you go to Get Sunday like the day of the week. GetSunday.com/Gleeman when you get to the checkout. That's 50% off your first box at GetSunday.com/Gleeman. Okay. The one other thing about Kepler I want to say was, one possible solution here, or at least kick the can down the road a little bit on a bigger decision with him, would be to play him in center field a little bit. And that's particularly relevant because Byron Buxton continues to be a full-time DH. B, Michael Taylor, although he hit a homer last night, has, proven to be to be kind of stretched playing literally every day. Right. And then beyond that, Nick Gordon was starting to get some playing time in center field as kind of a quasi-platoon partner with the right-handed hitting Taylor, Nick Gordon being a left-handed hitter, but then he fractured his tibia, and he's out, indefinitely, months probably. Right. So they used Willie Castro out there for one game in Houston, and that didn't look great because he's not a very good or experienced center fielder. Well, you say, Kepler's a left-handed hitter, and he's played hundreds of innings in center field early in his career, often filling in for Buxton for days or even weeks at a time, and he looked perfectly solid out there. He's a really good outfielder.
Center fielders don't have to hit the way right fielders.
Well, that's true too. But it would lessen the reliance on Taylor every day, which is a good thing. Yep. And I think Kepler as a lefty facing righties and Taylor as a righty facing lefties would be a pretty decent platoon. And then obviously the big benefit would be it would open up right field for Larnach or Wallner or some combination.
Willie Castro can go back to AAA for a little while, work on some stuff. You don't need him as a backup every place.
Work on some stuff. He's got the second highest OPS on the team.
Yeah, that's a fair point.
What does he need to work on?
I guess you're right. Yeah,
work on having less bad teammates.
He has been really good.
But here's the flaw in that solution, which is Max Kepler doesn't want to play center field. And we've talked about that in the past. And if you look, the last time he started a game in center field was August 4th, 2021, which is 2 years ago, almost 2 full years ago. And since then, the Twins have used 9 different starting center fielders, several of whom are forgettable, to be nice. Right. And they've not turned to Kepler once at a position that he once played regularly. Right. And the reason for that is, as I wrote today, he's expressed a very strong preference against playing center field. And so once that's not even an option, that further limits him to purely a right fielder a bad hitting right fielder. And, for all the time, I do think he's a truly excellent defensive right fielder. Like, he should have won a Gold Glove. I mean, he's one of the best I've ever seen. And I do think he's underrated in that regard because he's more of a smooth, kind of glide under the ball guy as opposed to a highlight reel type of guy. But let's be realistic. I mean, being a really good defensive right fielder can only make up for so much. It's gotten him to
It's not at the top of the defensive spectrum.
Right. It's gotten him to be a 2 wins above replacement player, which, by the way, the baseline for a starting position player is 2 wins above replacement. So he's been a low-end starting player.
We also talked a little bit on Monday's Patreon about Wallner in right field and what he brings to it, in particular that 95 mile per hour gun.
Yeah. I mean, he might have the best. We got to see a little more, but he might have the best right field arm in Twins history, and they've had some. Kadire, Nance. I mean, they've had some arms out there, but his arm is on another level. I mean, he was,
and he showed it versus the Blue Jays, and the Blue Jays learned to respect that arm.
Right. The first time he threw out Belt at second, and then the next day Bichette hit one down the line and didn't even try for
a second, a double. Right.
And so
nobody took first to third the entire. I think that whole series.
I mean, he has legit. Like, it's possible he has the best right field arm in baseball immediately.
Right, yeah.
He was a star high school pitcher at Forest Lake, won Mr. Baseball, which is high school player of the year, I think, in 2016. Now he was a hitter too, but he won it on the strength of his left-handed pitching. Right. And then when he went to Southern Miss, he moved to the outfield, but he still pitched in relief for them for a couple of years and threw, 96. Right. The throws he's unleashed from right field with the Twins are consistently 94, 95, 96 miles an hour with pretty good accuracy. So you look at him, and he's 6'4", and he's big and bulky, and it takes him a little while to get underway, to get the wheels moving.
Yeah. He doesn't have the range or the smoothness.
But I will say, similar to Larnach, but even more so, he is actually pretty fast for a guy his size once he's moving. Yeah. Like, if a ball gets hit into the gap and he's got a little time to run under it, he can get to stuff. Yeah. His size, similar to Larnach, also helps him just get to balls that, a 5'11" guy couldn't get to. Yeah. And the arm is a legit weapon. It's either going to kill a lot of base runners, which is ideal. Right. You remove a base runner and add an out, or, as we saw with Kadire in the middle of his career, once everyone got the scouting report, it just shuts down all attempts to advance bases, which is almost as good from the Twins' perspective. Yes. And so you look at Wallner, and look, I'm not here to tell you Wallner is some sort of can't-miss superstar prospect. No. I ranked him 4th on my preseason list, and he was a lot lower on some other list. I mean, he was closer to being 10th than 1st on my list even.
Yeah, before the 8-for-8 streak that he went on, he was hitting under 100. Right. Yeah, so batting under 100.
12 at-bats or whatever. But, the red flags are familiar, which is too many strikeouts. Right. He's a big, strong, hard-swinging, left-handed slugger, from the Joey Gallo mold. Mm-hmm. And he's going to strike out a ton. And because of that, he's going to have a low batting average, most likely. Yeah. Now, you're hoping for 240 instead of 210, but it's going to be in that range. And he's going to be prone to prolonged slumps, just because the fewer balls you're putting in play, the less chance you give yourself to bloop a couple of hits here or, whatever. Right. And, he's not going to get to as many balls as Max Kepler in the outfield. He's just not. But the arm does add value, and it's a legit weapon. It's also just fun to watch him uncork a throw.
It was really fun to watch.
And, I mean, the power, if he, can kind of get cemented in the big leagues and fulfill his upside, I mean, he has legit, 35 homer power. Like, he just launches balls and to all fields, really. And I would argue that in the, 25 games he's played for the Twins, whatever it is, he's shown more kind of two-strike hitting ability or bat-to-ball skill than expected. Now, it's still a very high strikeout profile. He's never going to hit 280, 300. Right. But he's shown a little more fight than the Sano's and the Gallos of that player type. And so, you just look at it and it's like, if this guy can hit 240, 250, and by the way, he draws a shitload of walks. Right. He has 116 walks in 161 games in the high minors the past 2 years. Right. Now, like we talked about with David Eckstein.
That doesn't necessarily play.
He's not going to draw 100 walks in the majors, but he could certainly draw 60 or 70 walks, hit 30 homers, bat 250, and kill a bunch of base runners with that arm. That's a really good all-around player. Now, the downside is he hits 205 and he just kind of washes out, or he's a bit player. But even in that scenario, I think the overall production would look kind of similar to Max Kepler.
Right.
I mean, for all the Max Kepler, what's so difficult for people to kind of wrap their brains around with Max Kepler is that he has a 231 career batting average, which is like, in the Sano and maybe Wallner zone. But he's getting there with a very low strikeout rate. He strikes out significantly less over the course of his career than an average hitter. And so that warps people's brain, breaks people's brains. Because when you see Miguel Sano or Joey Gallo or Matt Wallner, and they're swinging and missing, and you look and you go, well, yeah, of course this guy's hitting 210 or 220. He strikes out a million times.
Right.
Then you look at Kepler and you go, this guy almost never strikes out.
Right, yeah.
And
he looks like a 280 hitter.
Right. That's exactly right. And I think
yeah.
that has played a part in the Twins hanging on to him, and maybe even fans giving him a little bit longer leash than the numbers deserve. But as we've talked endlessly about, it's not the shift that killed him. It's the quality of his balls in play. He hits so many choppers and weak pop-ups and weak fly balls that they are essentially the same as striking out because they get converted into outs 99.9% of the time. Okay. Polanco's back.
Yeah.
We'll see. I mean, could be huge for the lineup. When healthy, he's one of their best all-around players.
2 long opposite field fly balls yesterday, both to the warning track.
And then he ripped a key hit down the right field line, too. Which that, to me, is 20 years from now, when you say, picture in your brain a Jorge Polanco at bat, it's turning on a pitch and ripping it down the right field line as a left-handed hitter. That is what I will remember about Jorge Polanco. So that could be huge.
Did he lead off too? Yeah, he led off yesterday.
Which I've been
kind of finally waiting to see.
I've been saying they should have been doing that for years.
I certainly think this year, yeah.
Let's see. There was one other. That's enough. We'll talk about Polanco once we get some looks at him. Yeah. He looks fine.
We'll talk about him on Monday on the Patreon. You can all join us.
That's the beauty of the Patreon. We don't have to wait a full week to talk to you guys again.
We can dissect this entire Cleveland Guardians series as well.
Yeah.
And see where this team is. They're 4.5 games up on Cleveland right now. They win a couple more.
Patreon, patreon.com/Gleeman. They're commercial free, over an hour.
Right.
Usually Mondays and Wednesdays.
It's just such a gimme.
Yeah, why not?
Right. I mean, this is a fun season.
You like us, right? Or you don't hate us.
Yeah, and it's not,
You've made it this far.
We charge $1 an episode, but I don't think we won't make it $9. I bet you we don't get another month above $9.
Yeah,
right.
It's $1 an episode. It's not,
right.
Not
and by the way, we're approaching things like the trade deadline and the draft, things that we're do deep dives into.
Okay. So last few notes here, and then we'll shut up. We mentioned Caleb Thielbar is on the verge of returning from a month-long oblique injury, which would be huge for the bullpen. I mean, look, they need to find out that he's fully healthy, obviously. But there was, and I give Giovanni Moran some credit.
Yes,
he stepped up in a big way, and it was at least useful as the lone lefty in the bullpen.
That bullpen is so shuffled right now from where it was in April. Literally Stewart is their second best. Nice to see Jax get in yesterday, have a clean inning.
Yeah, what's happened is guys pitched themselves into low leverage by struggling. Yeah. And no one really rises to high leverage to replace him except a new guy every 3 days pitches his way out of the current leverage and down to the bottom of the hierarchy. Yep. And just by default, someone has to move up. And so Jax has already kind of moved up because Jorge Lopez has pitched himself out of it. Pagan is sort of perpetually in the middle
limbo.
Land. Limbo.
Right. Yeah.
And so, right now it's Duran, who's been great. Yeah. Brock Stewart.
Yep.
Even after giving up the grand slam in was it in Houston?
That was the first runs he's given up.
Yeah.
And let's be careful. Take a look at how many walks he has and how many innings before we get too carried away with Brock Stewart. Right?
And then you have hopefully Thielbar, which there were so many spots because he's a lefty, but because he also can get righties out. There have been so many spots over the last 2 or 3 weeks where it's the 6th or 7th inning, a couple guys are on base, they end up bringing in Pagan, or they bring in Moran, or they bring in Jax, or whoever it is, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't, but there are so many spots that have just been screaming out for this is a Caleb Thielbar sort of put out the fire spot, and they've really missed him, and it sounds strange to talk about a 36-year-old middle relief lefty like that, but I mean, he has become
really good,
essential and very underrated to their bullpen over the past couple of years. So
it's nice to see some of those low leverage arms be, not necessarily dependable high leverage guys, but somewhat dependable guys. Jose De Leon has had a pretty good run here.
De Leon's going to get a shot too, because
you mentioned Moran.
As we mentioned, Jorge Lopez is just an absolute mess right now.
Yeah.
And I think it seems to me,
he just doesn't seem to know where the ball is going, period.
Seems to be as much mental as physical, which is something he went through a little bit last year too. They're in trouble if they don't have him, and they were counting on him to be their primary setup man. And for April, it for the most part looked that way.
Yeah.
And then it just has gone to hell. And the only way he warmed up yesterday, like the only way, at least this is what Baldelli said yesterday, is the only way he's going to get out of this is to pitch through it. So we're going to try to find spots. But the problem, as we just mentioned, is if you got 3 or 4 guys in an 8-man bullpen who are low leverage, kind of only use in spots that don't matter, well, there aren't enough spots that don't matter to get all those guys used. So
he's literally sort of at the bottom of the run right now, to the point where you hesitate to put him in an 8-run lead.
Right.
They put him in on Wednesday with a 8-0 lead, and he gives up 2 immediately and 2 more on base before Stewart comes in and has to get 3 out without getting any outs. It was nuts.
And then the other thing on the pitching front is Kenta Maeda started his rehab on Tuesday with 2 scoreless innings. The plan is, I think, either I want to say Friday or Saturday. I guess it would be Saturday. He's going to pitch, it sounds like 3 innings for the Saints, and then he'll pitch again next week and throw 4 innings, and that was kind of the plan during spring training.
Right.
They've said
they're building him as a starter, right?
Falvey, I asked him about that, and he said we're building him up fully as a starting pitcher, which takes longer, but they have a maximum of 30 days. And given how well Louis Varland has pitched, who we didn't even talk about him, he shoved against the Astros. He was great. There's certainly no rush. I'm of the opinion that unless Louis Varland really struggles here over the next couple of weeks, I'm not interested in bumping Louis Varland from the rotation for a 35-year-old rehabbing Kenta Maeda. Now, the Twins may feel differently, but at the very least, there's no reason to rush that decision. Right. You want Kenta Maeda to take the maximum amount of time. You want to make sure he can throw 5 strong innings multiple times. So I would expect them to take the full 30 days with him, which is the rehab window for a pitcher, which gives Louis Varland, 6 more starts or something like that. And at that point, again, maybe somebody else is hurt. Maybe Maeda doesn't make it through the rehab, whatever it is.
And it's worth pointing out that they don't really have here's the guy that's waiting in AAA to come up and maybe Brent Hedrick. I don't know. But,
he's been
good,
But the problem, though, is Maeda can't be that guy because he can't be sent to AAA.
That's right. That's the problem.
Now, Varland could be sent to AAA, but I just have a hard time. If you thought people freaked out about Wallner getting sent down, send down Louis Varland. Right. I needed to tell people this yesterday. Managers are famous. We saw this from Gardenhire all the time, but every baseball manager, they make the laziest nicknames for players of all time. All they do is take the guy's name, first name or last name, and add a Y or an IE. Right. So, Lou Ford becomes Louis, and that's his nickname. Except Louis Varland is already Louis.
Right.
And so what did Rocco Baldelli start calling him yesterday? Lou. He's Lou Varland now.
All right. Okay.
Lou Varland. I like that. That's the only way managers' brains can go with nicknames. They can either remove or add an IE or a Y. If you already have it, it gets removed. If you don't have it, it gets added. There's your nickname, Lou Varland. I like that. Dr. Lou Varland, I want to call him. But he's been phenomenal. And I feel like we
go with Lewis.
Yeah, although I don't even know if he's a Lewis.
I don't know either.
I'll ask him today. He's fairly easy to talk to. That's a good opener. What's your actual name?
Yeah, are you a Lewis? Are you a Lou? What are you?
Because I forget who, but there was somebody named Johnny, and that was their actual name. Here's a good example. Sonny Gray's name is Sonny. It's not a nickname.
Right.
His name wasn't like Santino.
So does he call him Son?
No, I think he calls him Mr. Gray. Mr. Gray is what he calls him. Maeda is on the comeback
the
trail.
Suspects? Not the usual suspects. What was it? Reservoir Dogs.
Mr. Pink, Mr. Gray. Yeah. And then let's see. There was one other. Yeah, the Bally Sports stuff, but we don't really have time to get into it. We talked a lot about the Bally Sports stuff on the last Patreon.
Yeah, let me summarize one thing about it though.
Okay.
If they end up getting out of this deal, and you are somebody who has cut the cord, it is probably good news for you.
Right.
Right. Right now, you can really only watch the Twins on cable or satellite. Right. And what we have seen from the Padres is they basically approached the biggest cable companies, got a channel from them.
Yeah, it's
right?
like DirecTV, which I have, is like channel 694-2 is called like San Diego baseball now.
Right.
And it's just Padres games.
Exactly right.
And it's available as a standalone streaming product through MLB. I think they priced it at $19.99 a month, at least initially. I would go a step further, which is to say, if you're tech savvy enough, and I say that with quotes, to listen to this podcast, and if you're a Patreon subscriber, certainly, you're probably tech savvy enough to figure out the streaming options if that becomes available.
That's right. So, whereas right now you really have almost no streaming options for the Twins, you will at least have a $20 a month stream. At the very least, you'll have a $20 a month, and it's possible that they actually just put themselves on some streaming services. Without
the Padres are
on one
Fubo and YouTube, I think.
Oh, they're on YouTube now too? I didn't
Hulu.
see.
It was one other big one.
Okay.
But they're working to add it. I mean, they had to go pretty quickly here to get this rolling.
Yes, right.
The ruling yesterday was in MLB's favor in the bankruptcy court. Dave St. Peter testified.
Okay.
Here's one thing we learned. The Twins make, was it $54.8 million a year from TV?
This year they do, yeah.
Which is a lot more than we thought.
Yeah, we thought it was over 40.
And Dave St. Peter said in his testimony that Bally or Sinclair, Diamond Sports, Sinclair Media, who are the villain in this, I would argue, offered them a new 5-year deal, because this is that last year of the Twins' deal with them, thankfully.
Right.
They offered them a new 5-year extension for $54 million a year, and the Twins said, basically.
But that was going to include more than just the cable rights. That was also going to include the streaming rights. Right.
I mean, I can tell you this.
Right now they're getting paid $54 million a year without the streaming rights, I think.
I can tell you this unequivocally. There is not a single person involved in Major League Baseball, and certainly not running a team like Dave St. Peter or just the team themselves, who want anything to do with Sinclair Media at this point. Yeah. They want to be out of this thing, and some of them have 10 years on a deal. Right. The Twins are fortunate in the sense that they have 4 months on a deal. Now, that doesn't mean whatever the next place for the Twins is going to be great. Right. There are limited options for that. It might end up just being part of MLB's overall, kind of centralized streaming product. But there is not the extent to which people are against Bally, and victory.
There was a lot of bitterness in that courtroom between those teams, between Major League Baseball and Diamond Sports.
I sit in the press box and we do pregame with on-camera people, production people, cameramen, all kinds of people, announcers. They're all Bally employees. I mean, they're Twins employees, I guess technically, but these people are just getting effed over and screwed around with and just being put in the dark for their livelihoods because of this one dumbass multi-billion-dollar corporation that has done some real evil things beyond baseball that you can Google. Yeah. And it's just such a shame. I mean, I feel like there's a lot of walks of life where this is being said in different things, but it's just such a shame that one very rich person or one very rich conglomerate corporation can just decide, I'm going to be an asshole, and I'm just going to screw over hundreds of people who are just trying to be a cameraman or being a sideline reporter or being an announcer or producer. And it's just like these people with Bally, they have nothing to do with this. They have no control over this. They're just in the dark, the same as everyone else. They're showing up to the ballpark to try to do their job the best they can, and they're just screwed over by this thing. They don't know what their future holds. They're in limbo with a lot of things. Their contracts are up at the end of the season. It's terrible. Beyond just that it sucks if you're a Twins fan. If you just want to watch Twins games, it sucks. But for the people behind the scenes, it's horrible as well. There's a human component to this thing that goes beyond just, why can't I watch my team?
It's also, there's also questions about, will there be a pregame show? Will there be a postgame show? All of those things were Bally Sports North productions. Yeah. So when the Twins get back those rights, they can put the games on, but are they going to invest in, all the additional stuff around that they count on their partners to take care of that?
2 out of the 8 cameramen? Are they eliminating whatever it is? And something we discussed quite a bit on Patreon, which is just a hypothetical that came to my brain, which is if next season, it's too late for this to happen this season, but let's say all the teams are able to break their contracts with Bally, which is like 14 teams, and it goes to the centralized MLB product. My fear is that MLB will say, why do we need a home broadcast and a road broadcast for every team? Why don't we just have, when the Twins play the Tigers, do we need a Twins broadcast and a Tigers broadcast if it's all being streamed out of the same place? And that my fear is, the product will be worse. Whatever you think of your home announcers, whether you're a Twins fan or a fan of another team.
At least they're home announcers.
At least they know the team and they're around the team and they're familiar with all the players. You listen to the rare times the Twins are on some national thing. It's fun to hear an outside perspective on the Twins, but there's just stuff they just have no clue what they're talking about. And my fear is twofold. One, the quality of analysis or commentary or just sort of minutia surrounding the team will plummet because they just don't know the team. Right. And then two, well, that's just half of all people involved with broadcasts who are going to be out of work for no good reason.
Well,
so it's a horrible situation all around.
Yeah. I mean, it also means not that there's a ton of objectivity in the media from Bally Sports North when it comes to covering the Twins. They're going to rah-rah them as much as anybody. But when it's any of that, the programming is completely developed by the Twins, holy moly.
Well, that's true too, yeah. There's at least yeah, that's true, I guess.
You've got to at least protect your reputation a little bit if you're Bally Sports North. You've got to have enough of enough objectivity to be able to claim that you are somewhat objective, or lose all
Yeah. So for now, the Padres are kind of the guinea pig. They're going to be the first one through the door to get bloody. They had a 20-year, $1.2 billion agreement with Bally Sport. It was Fox Sports, but it became Bally Sports, and I think they're like halfway through that, basically.
Yeah, that's right. 2032, I think, is when.
And that's just evaporated now because Bally decided, well, that's too much money to pay, even though that's a contract. Yeah. And we'll just stop paying. Yeah. And then the Padres
didn't have to go deal with a bankruptcy court the way the Twins do because they just were told by Bally,
we're not paying you anymore.
We're just not going to pay it.
Which to me is like, what's the point of a contract? I mean, I'm just an idiot who dropped out of college. I'm sure there's some expert. But what is the point of the contract if it can just be blatantly ignored?
These are the rights you get in bankruptcy court.
Right. So it's ridiculous to me. But the Padres are now the only one that's being produced. I saw clips of their broadcast. Same announcers, same crew, same graphics for the most part, a little bit. But they've adopted they're holding microphones that have the MLB logo instead of the Bally logo. And there's a few subtle changes. But yes, I would view that as, I don't want to say a good outcome, but a non-horrible outcome if the Twins broke free. Yeah. Started being streamed.
If you are somebody who cut the cord, you suddenly have an ability to actually watch these games.
And I think either way, I don't think.
And by the way, the way it works, my understanding of the way it works is if you've got the MLB subscription for out of market stuff, you know what I mean? So, like, for instance, we have the MLB TV subscription, right? So Kristen can watch Phillies games. We can't watch Phillies games while she's in Philly. The people in Philly can't watch those.
It's blacked out.
Right. You're just going to – that's the same subscription. All that changes – is that not it?
They had to buy a separate Padres subscription for $19.99.
That's what I was wondering.
Yeah. But it's not blacked out if you buy that subscription.
To me. Okay.
But,
okay.
I mean, who knows how that will shake out. I mean, part of the problem is the blackout restrictions are already in place, so they can't just waive it for one team and keep it for the Twins or the Guardians or whatever. But
the other thing is that you will have to actually find your game on a different channel, right? So it's going to be on a different channel on DirecTV or Xfinity or whatever.
Search for a channel to find Twins games over the last few years when they've been unable to watch it. And here's what I'll say. Now, maybe I'm wrong about this, but I think at this stage, given the ruling yesterday and given what happened with the Padres, and perhaps most importantly, given the fact that the Twins only have 4 months left until they can be rid of Bally Sports as a partner, I don't think there's a truly bad outcome left for the Twins. Now, for Major League Baseball as a whole and the collapse of cable and, bigger picture, absolutely. There are
longer term, it's a much bigger question.
Potentially. But just for the Twins today, like for the rest of this season, because there's only really two ways it can go at this point. One is it's just business as usual for the remainder of the season. They stay on Bally.
Just on a different channel.
Right. Well, no, I'm saying.
I'm sorry. Okay,
nothing changes, which I think is probably most likely at this point. If the contract gets broken, they'll just go to MLB. MLB will take over. You'll be able to stream it You'll be able to get it on various streaming out, or there's going to be a DirecTV channel for it, like they've done with the Padres. Now that's going to be annoying for a while. It's the muscle memory of tuning into 668 on DirecTV or whatever it is. Right. But you'll still be able to watch it. I don't think there's any scenarios in this 4-month period until the Twins can be rid of them where it becomes less available to Twins fans. I think the only real outcomes are exactly as available as it is now, which is flawed, but it's not a change, or more available. Right. Now, it might be a little more expensive or whatever, but also, $19.99 a month for Twins games.
For 30 Twins games a month.
Right, less than $1 each. I mean, that's up to each person to decide if that's worthwhile. But here's the other thing, that you remove the Twins from Bally. There's a lot of people out there. I know they'll still have the Wild and the Wolves, but there's many people who will no longer have much use for Bally. Yeah. And then by extension, I can tell you I'm a person who has held on to DirecTV only for live sports.
Right. Yes.
So if you start removing the Twins from that and I can just stream it without having any DirecTV, then it collapses cable and DirecTV even further.
Fair point.
So that I think
makes it a lot easier to cut the cord.
Right. Because I think a lot of the kind of holdouts, at least among people like under 60, let's say, are only holding out for live programming, and the majority of that is sports. Okay. We'll be back Monday on the Patreon side.
We're just going to talk Guardians and Twins for a good hour and a half. It'll be fun. Yeah.
And
probably back on Wednesday after that to talk maybe another mailbag.
Yeah.
Getting
I like the mailbags. The mailbags
have
been so good lately, because we've been getting a million questions. But I love that there are in-depth Twins questions, which brings us to talk about players
tangents
that we wouldn't normally. But I also like that there's questions about you playing center field or just random. There was one the other day that was do the majority of players drive to the game? That's something, drive themselves to the game. And we talked about the players' parking lot and all that stuff. That is something you could give me 10,000 years as a podcast co-host, and I would never have thought, I bet there's an interesting 8 minutes to do about this, but it turns out that way. So thank you to everyone for sending in questions. You guys should sign up for the Patreon.
Thank you to our sponsors, Nuts.com, Game Time, Stamps, Native, Sunday. Get that lot taken care of quickly. And we'll talk to you on Monday. Gleeman.